Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the Seaman, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Seaman's Cinema Sit Down. If you saw my last video, you know that this was a fairly good week at the theater for the old Seaman, man. He got to a bunch of things this weekend. And the second movie that we're going to talk about, as many ups and downs as there were throughout all weekend with what we went and saw, this one had a whole lot of ups and delivered on a way that I wasn't expecting this movie to deliver. It was marketed towards more of a mainstream action audience, and it seemed like it was going to be kind of one of these action thriller heist movies, but it's not quite that. So pull up a chair, man, take a seat. We're getting ready to dive in, spoiler-free, on Widows. The latest from Steve McQueen, who's coming off of Best Picture for his last movie, 12 Years a Slave, and honestly, McQueen is just, I think, on fire the whole movie. I really liked what he did. I really liked his perspective for this heist flick. It's a different take, but it's one that I thought worked really well. And it's because he's doing some awesome stuff behind the camera, man. The cinematography in this movie is absolutely stellar, man. There's just so many different spots where, like, the whole movie, for me personally, I thought there was something to take away in every scene, whether it be from the acting, from the score, from the writing, or from, the director's chair. And a lot of the scenes that pop, don't pop so much from a writing or acting perspective, but pop big time from the director's chair. He has a couple different interesting shots, where kind of like characters are focused down in corners, like over here. And then they'll kind of phase out, and then it'll focus on what's going on behind them. And McQueen does that a couple times, and every time it works really well. He has a couple 360 type camera shots that usually focus in scenes featuring Daniel Kaluuya, which just totally work with what his character is doing and adds to those scenes. But the one shot that everyone's going to be talking about is when Colin Farrell's character is driven from one part of the 18th Ward in Chicago to where his house is, which is on the outskirts of the 18th Ward. It's like the last house in the 18th, where a regular person might move in. The 18th, is not, too pleasant of a place in Chicago. And this drive sums up everything that McQueen is telling you about Chicago and about legacy politicians and about just different things that are going on politically in Chicago, and the way money flows and all these things get kind of all summed up in just one shot. And he really does, I think, do a fairly good job of telling that part of the story in the first half of this movie, which kind of focuses in and around that stuff as well as the buildup of our heist. And that's the thing with the movie too that I was really kind of not aware of, is the way this movie was going to not just be a heist movie but also balance politics and things about the way Chicago works. And I thought that McQueen did a pretty good job balancing it, especially in the first half of the movie. I think the second half really kind of pushes us more towards the heist, but the stuff he gets out with the Chicago stuff I thought was really good. And that's one of those things where it's like, Colin Farrell plays Jack Mulligan, who is the son of Robert Duvall's Tom Mulligan, who is the current alderman of the 18th, has a heart attack and has to kind of step down. And that's creating this current election run for Jack. But what I didn't realize is that he is, I knew he seemed like he was going to be like a politician, like someone up there. I didn't realize it was going to revolve around an election with him going up against Jamal Manning, our like kind of lead antagonist, I suppose you could say. Brian Tyree Henry, really, really good in the movie. But his character is kind of interesting as he kind of works within a criminal realm or comes from a criminal background, but is trying to run for alderman. And there's all this stuff mixed into the heist. I just thought that he did a really good job of balancing it. And when we get to the heist stuff, it's a different take, but something I thought that really, really worked. And I've heard some people go back and forth on the heist and whether they like it or they didn't like it. And I thought there was one key piece of information that McQueen throws in at the end of the heist, back at like the meetup place, where he drops this one thing that is specific to the heist itself, which explains so much of why things play out the way they do. So I dug the movie from that standpoint, and I really did enjoy the story that both McQueen and co-writer Gillian Flynn delivered on the screenplay side of it. And I thought it was really interesting to dive into Chicago, but also dive into these women's lives without like having to fully dive in. We don't like get down to every nook and cranny of these three women. Or there are four widows, but three that we kind of mostly focus on. But McQueen is able to give us a really good sense of their story through things we see or small details that he drops here and there, that by the time we get through the first half of the movie, I'm fully invested in all of our characters. And there is a good handful of them, and they're all excellent. And of course, it starts with Viola Davis, who plays Veronica, the wife of Liam Neeson's character, Harry Rawlings. And Harry is kind of like the guy who has orchestrated this team of criminals that do all of these different heists. They've been working together for a long time, but the four wives do not know each other. So when the men die, and what I like too is McQueen gets that over with quick. We get through that part of the story and we don't have to linger. We can kind of just keep pushing through what we have to. And that opening, the opening sequence is great, man. There's like a snap cut that comes out of nowhere that you're just like, oh man. And it kind of goes into this back and forth that gives you a really good sense of Viola Davis and Liam Neeson, as well as this heist. And you see it go wrong, and it goes so terribly wrong. But that leads into, the widows, and Viola Davis is excellent. I mean, she's one of the best things going on in Hollywood right now. She's such a pro. She's just so good, and especially when it comes to the emotional stuff, man. She really, really nails the emotional stuff in this movie. The scene in her lead up to the funeral is just like her in a mirror, and it's so good. But the other thing I like about Viola Davis too is she, we've seen her be team leader before, Suicide Squad, and she has this commanding presence. But the way she is the leader of this group is not what you would expect. Her style is very confrontational. What's cool with the whole group is these are just 4 women, or 3 women. Carrie Coon is our 4th widow. She isn't involved in the heist really, and there's a reason for that. But our 3, Alice, Linda, and Veronica, played by Elizabeth Debicki, Alice, Michelle Rodriguez, Linda, and Viola Davis, they're just 4 regular women. So pulling off a heist, they have no experience. They have a month to do this all. And they make a bunch of mistakes, and they have to kind of alter on the fly from their planning standpoint to, the different things. And some people didn't like that, but I thought it was very natural. It felt real because these are just 4 women trying to pull this thing off. And like I said, that piece of information that we get at the end explains how everything plays out the way it does. And I really dug what Viola Davis was doing from that standpoint while she's dealing with her stuff, by also having to figure out a way to get this group of strangers to work together to pull this off. Michelle Rodriguez is solid. I didn't really think Linda had a ton. I mean, she has stuff to do, but she didn't really do anything that popped for me. And she is involved in that one strange scene that I still just go, why? But the standout star for me in this movie, Elizabeth Debicki. I've been a fan of Debicki for a while, man. Her and Tom Hiddleston were on The Night Watchman. So good, and she was fantastic in that. And then, of course, she's Aisha, the leader of the Sovereign in the Marvel movies. And I've been a fan of Debicki, like I said, for a while. This movie's about to put this girl on the map. She is the one widow that gets the most completely told story. We really get the most into her backstory, and where she's coming from and the things that are going on with her. And every time she's on screen, besides being so striking and stunningly beautiful, what she was doing from an acting standpoint, I just thought was phenomenal. And every time she was on screen, she pulls you towards her, which is hard to do when Viola Davis is in a room, and I don't necessarily think she wins any scene with Viola. There's one scene between the 2 of them that I was like, they both won that scene, you know what I mean? But I really, really loved what Elizabeth Debicki did in this movie. As I said, Carrie Coon plays our 4th widow, and her story is interesting. I won't say much about her story, but because she's kind of on the outside of the heist, but what goes on with her, very important, and I like the way it played out. Which leads us to our 4th woman in the movie, and the 4th woman of the heist, Cynthia Erivo, who's a babysitter, and she kind of gets pulled in randomly. And that is the one thing with the movie. There's a lot of random people that are just like, okay, I can understand why the widows get in on the job, but I'm not so understanding as to why Cynthia Erivo says yes right away, other than like the fact that maybe she could come out with some big time cash. But she, very, very little screen time, but very, very good. Hotel Royale was another spot where she just stood out. And here, same thing, man. Every time she's on screen, I'm loving what Cynthia Erivo's doing. Then, like I said, Liam Neeson, John Bernthal, Manuel Garcia Rolfo, and Coburn Goss are our 4 men. And outside of Liam Neeson, the other 3 don't really get very much screen time once we're past that opening sequence. But Liam Neeson does pop up in some flashbacks with Viola Davis, and he's bringing his A game. That's the one thing I loved about this movie, is everybody was bringing their A game. No one was really, cruising through this movie. Robert Duvall, legend, and he's really good, man. He has one scene with Colin Farrell that, oh, God, it's just so good. And it was just classic Duvall. Really good to see him, and he just fit the role so well. I also enjoyed Molly Kuntz, who's kind of like Colin Farrell's girlfriend, campaign assistant. I couldn't really get a full vibe off of what their relationship was, but I thought she did a good job. And that brings us to our 2 alderman candidates, man. Colin Farrell I love Colin Farrell, man. He's been one of my favorite actors for a very long time, and he's been on a serious run lately where he's been on fire. And I really liked what he did in this movie, man. He's the perfect balance of everything he needs to be, right? Like you hate him sometimes. You feel like maybe he's trying to do the right thing sometimes. You don't know whether to root or not root for him. And he's just good in every facet that they give him in the movie. And then Brian Tyree Henry, again, someone who doesn't get a ton of screen time. He gets a lot of play early and a little play late, but when he is on screen too, someone who commands it and brings his A game. And he has a scene with Viola Davis where he is so imposing and intimidating. You're just like, woo, man, it feels like Viola might be shaking a little bit. She seems a little scared. And Viola Davis ain't someone who seems like they get scared by much. But Brian Tyree Henry is excellent. And then my second standout in this movie, the second big winner, and maybe edged Elizabeth Debicki a little bit, saved him best for last maybe, Daniel Kaluuya. We mentioned those 360 sequences, but good God, man. Every time this guy is on screen, the screen is on fire. He is terrifying and intimidating, and the style and approach to his gangster is so cool and scary, man. I mean, the way he just kind of comes in is just it shakes you watching the sequences. And he has 2. He has one in a bowling alley that has some things that he does that I'm just everything in that scene, the way that scene ends too, he does something, you're like, oh, and then you're like, oh, and that's who he is. But then there's this gym scene with these 2 kids, and that's the one that we've seen in the trailer where he's doing that kind of up in here. Woo! Woo, man, that scene, I was just like, oh, this guy is bad. And Daniel Kaluuya was brilliant, man. This guy popped huge in this movie. I'm just make this guy the bad guy in everything, right? It was we got him in Get Out. Really, really love that character, attached to him. You root for him the whole movie. Then we see him in Black Panther, where he's good guy who gets kind of turned to the bad guy's team and is in the middle of the whole movie. And then this movie, full-on bad guy. This, I think, might be the best stuff we've seen from Daniel Kaluuya. This is something I want to see more of from him. I loved his story arc. I loved how he came in and out of the story. He helps push everything in this movie because of how intimidating and scary he is as an enforcer for his cousin, Brian Tyree Henry. So, look, man, like I said, this cast is phenomenal. The story is interesting, and it's not your traditional heist movie. Like I said, it's a really, really slow burn. It's methodically paced. Some people might say the pacing is off for this type of movie, that it doesn't work. I just don't think those people are getting the movie that McQueen is going for here. And like I said, it's more than just a heist movie. He's dealing with a real big, complex story, and I think he delivers it in a way where you can take everything that he wants you to take away from it, and you can enjoy the heck out of this movie. And the heist, when we get there, I enjoyed the heist, man. I'm on the edge of my seat, because by the time you get there, you're like, I don't know if these women are ready for this. And as I said, it all plays out in a way that made a lot of sense. So I really, really dug Widows, man. I'm right there with the critics. I think they're on point with this one. I think that this movie, though, I was shocked that it had such resounding high scores everywhere I looked, because I could see how someone might dislike this movie, as the way it was advertised was kind of more action and mainstream, and the delivery and execution is a slow burning drama. That I thought worked, but I could totally understand anybody that's not going to like this movie. I don't think this movie's going to work for everybody, because it's not what you expect. But if you buy in, you go for the ride, what Steve McQueen takes us on is real good, and he had the perfect crew to be driving, riding shotgun, and chilling in the back seat. So that's it, man. That's all the Seaman's got to say about widows. I mean, you see, I'm in my all black just for some widow action, man. I'm ready to go do a heist. But now it's your turn, man. I want you to heist this video and give me all your comments down below. Let me know what you liked about heist, what you liked about widows, if you saw it, what you didn't like. Are you intrigued? Has the Seaman enticed you? Do you want to check out widows? Leave all that down below in the comments. Note any spoilers if you're gonna drop them. As always, if you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up, and if you're new here, hit that subscribe and little bell so you get alerts every time I make a new video. The Seaman's Cinema Sit Down. I'm the Seaman, and I'm signing off. Peace! Hey, you like the Seaman's videos? Well, why don't you click on this one and hit that subscribe button there? Yeah!